For years, an elderly janitor, Aaron Mitchell, silently swept Fort Lincoln's gates. Dismissed as eccentric by most soldiers, only Private Jason Miller noticed the quiet dignity in his posture and the faded name patch on his jacket, hinting at a hidden past. Jason's quiet suspicions deepened when new, strict security protocols by Colonel Ror led MPs to confront Mitchell. During the encounter, a hidden metal box spilled open, revealing a silver star and a Thunderline unit patch, a classified mission where many were presumed lost. The base buzzed as General Richard Hawthorne made an unexpected arrival. Recognizing the quiet janitor, the general rendered a profound, emotional salute, declaring, "This man is not a janitor. He is Captain Aaron Mitchell. He stayed behind to save us." The base fell silent, awaiting the incredible truth behind this forgotten hero. If Captain Aaron Mitchell's incredible story of silent duty and forgotten heroism moved you, please show your support. Like this video, share it with others, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more powerful narratives that deserve to be heard. Let's honor these unsung legacies together. Set of military dog tags resting against the inside of his shirt. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. The weight of those tags, and the way Mitchell quietly readjusted his coat afterward, like shielding something sacred, said more than words could. That morning, something shifted in Jason. He stopped seeing a janitor and started seeing a sentinel, one who no longer stood guard by command, but by choice. From that moment on, he watched the old man with a different kind of respect, the kind usually reserved for decorated war heroes and fallen comrades. And so each day continued, quiet and unchanging, at least on the surface. Mitchell swept the perimeter with that same steady rhythm, eyes often drawn toward the horizon. His presence was a constant, like the slow unfurling of a flag or the crisp echo of boots on asphalt. The base moved around him, oblivious to the stories stitched into the seams of his jacket or the silent history tucked behind his eyes. Until the day the SUV rolled in. It arrived like a shadow stretching across the compound, sleek, black, unmarked. Soldiers straightened without knowing why. The vehicle came to a sharp stop just inside the eastern gate, and the driver stepped out without a word. From the back emerged a tall figure, rigid, slow-moving, metals catching the dawn like stars caught in motion. General Richard Hawthorne, known across commands as a living legend, stood like a man seeing a ghost. His gaze didn't sweep the grounds. It didn't drift to the watchtower or the rows of soldiers paused mid-march. It locked immediately on the old man with the broom. Mitchell had paused, barely halfway through a sweep, one foot on the curb, hand resting against the wooden handle. His expression didn't change. He didn't speak, but the general did, with a voice that had once commanded battalions and thundered over airwaves, but now cracked like brittle paper. He whispered, "Captain Aaron Mitchell, is that really you?" The world seemed to stutter. The soldiers nearby stopped breathing. Even the breeze that had stirred dust and dried leaves seemed to still. Jason Miller caught mid-step, turned to look at Mitchell, and saw not a janitor, but a name suddenly returned to life. Captain Aaron Mitchell. The pieces fell together all at once, loud in their silence. The posture, the discipline, the way he watched the gate as if guarding it with more than eyes. The photograph, the dog tags, the unspoken salute. A man who had once commanded. A man who had chosen silence over ceremony. In that breathless second, everything they thought they knew shattered. And the story of the quiet man with the broom, the ghost who never asked, never spoke, and never left, finally began to emerge, not in words, but in the wide eyes of those who had never seen him until now. The name patch stitched into the jacket's lining caught Jason's eye. A. Mitchell. That one detail lit a fuse in his memory. Mitchell. The name scratched at a half-buried recollection from a months-old training debrief. A lesson the sergeants had once shared about fallen heroes, those whose bravery had slipped through the cracks of history. There had been one story in particular. Captain Aaron Mitchell, Special Recon, declared missing in action during Operation Thunderline 1977, somewhere deep in Southeast Asia. The mission was classified, no remains recovered, no ceremony, no closure. Jason didn't say anything at first, not to anyone, But later that night, he pulled out his field notebook and began to write, his handwriting tense with the weight of something unfinished. A. Mitchell, 1977, Thunderline, missing. The words stared back at him like puzzle pieces from a forgotten war. The next morning, while the barracks buzzed with idle talk and morning routines, Jason tossed out the thought like a pebble into still water. Hey, that old guy with the broom, any of you ever wonder if he might have served? Corporal Davis nearly choked on his protein bar from laughing. What, you think he's some kind of hidden war legend or something? Bro, lay off the action flicks. Sergeant Toller joined in with a smirk. If he was a real vet, he'd be on VA benefits, not out there freezing his ass off sweeping sidewalks. Everyone chuckled and turned back to their phones. Everyone except Jason. He couldn't laugh it off. Not anymore. That evening, while the base grew quiet, Jason headed to the old section of the library, the one no one really bothered with unless they were bored or in trouble. He combed through dusty training manuals and outdated mission logs until he found it. A single brief entry in a forgotten archive. Thunderline, compromised extraction, 7 survivors, commander listed as MIA. Name redacted. That was all. No elaboration, no closure. Just a shadow in the margins of official history. But something had already started to unravel inside him. Why did the old man, Mitchell, stand a little straighter every time a military jeep rolled by? Why did his eyes, weathered but sharp, quietly track officers with the stillness of someone waiting, hoping to be recognized? Most of all, why had no one ever bothered to ask who he was? Jason had no real answers, but his gut told him something true. The man with the broom was more than a quiet fixture outside the gate. He was a story left unfinished, a chapter everyone else had forgotten to turn the page on. The morning it all changed began just like the others. Aaron Mitchell arrived before the first light, his steps steady, his broom in hand, wind pressed against his zippered jacket as he moved along the outer sidewalk near the eastern gate of Fort Lincoln. The base looked unchanged, gray concrete, 2 guards posted, the American flag rustling above. But something subtle had shifted. Colonel David Ror had taken command earlier that week. Young, disciplined, and razor-focused on protocol, Ror believed in tightening every detail of base security. His first initiative, remove all civilian presence from the fence perimeter. No exceptions, no leniency. At precisely 0600 hours, 2 MPs approached Aaron. They weren't rude, but there was no room left for familiarity. Sir, one of them began, his voice professional but firm, I'm going to have to ask you to move away from the gate. You're not authorized to be this close. Aaron looked up slowly. His eyes were calm, steady. I've been sweeping this stretch for years. We understand, but the new orders are clear. Civilians past the yellow line aren't allowed. I'm sorry, but you'll need to leave. Aaron didn't argue. He simply nodded, then leaned his broom against the fence and crouched down to gather his belongings. A small plastic bucket with cleaning supplies, a neatly folded jacket, and a weathered satchel that looked like it had crossed oceans. That's when it happened. As he lifted the satchel, its zipper snagged on the edge of the metal bench nearby. A metal box tumbled from its flap and hit the pavement with a hard, echoing clatter. The lid sprang open on impact. For a moment, everything froze. Inside that box were items that didn't belong to some forgotten old man clinging to habit. A silver star, dulled with age but unmistakable in meaning. A worn patch, edges singed, barely legible, with the words Special Recon Thunderline. Beneath it, folded with care and yellowed by time, a photo. 8 men in uniform standing shoulder to shoulder in front of a helicopter, burning in the background. Smoke and fire suspended in the frame like a living memory. They looked younger, their faces streaked with soot, their eyes carrying the kind of resolve that doesn't fade with time. Rodriguez, a young logistics clerk assigned to the gate that morning, stepped closer. His breath caught in his throat as he recognized what he was seeing. Sir, he said softly, eyes locked on the patch. I've seen that before. In a debriefing. That's Thunderline. That mission went sideways. Back in the 1970s, they had lost nearly everyone. The mission had ended in silence, shrouded in secrecy. Inside the guard post, Private First Class Jason Miller had been scribbling something on a clipboard when he heard the words that froze him in place and sent a shock down his spine. The clipboard slipped from his hands and hit the concrete floor with a dull clatter. He rushed outside, breath caught in his chest. "Wait, what did you just say?" he asked wide-eyed, staring at Rodriguez. The logistics clerk, calm but visibly affected, pointed to a faded photograph. "If this is who I think it is," he said carefully, "that mission was classified. Nobody came back. The commander never made it. Presumed KIA." Jason's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He turned and spotted Aaron Mitchell kneeling by a dusty box. There was a gentleness, a kind of reverent finality in the way Aaron was closing it, his hands slow and deliberate, as if sealing something sacred. Jason crouched beside him, eyes locked on the older man's lined face, and asked in a tone barely above a whisper, "Sir, were you Thunderline?" Aaron didn't reply immediately. Instead, he glanced past Jason through the open gate into a distance only he could see. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, quiet, anchored by something far older than either of them. "Not everyone made it back," he said, "but someone had to stay behind to make sure the others did." Jason stood without another word. He didn't stop at the gate, didn't look back, didn't wait for orders. He ran, full sprint across the open yard, dodging startled privates, almost knocking over two as he stormed toward headquarters. He didn't even pause to knock, just burst into the admin office. "Captain Walters," he gasped, "I need to speak with you, now." The captain looked up sharply from behind her desk, eyes narrowing. "Miller, you'd better have a damn good reason for this interruption." "I do," he said between gasps. "I think we've been ignoring a living piece of military history." Back by the gate, Aaron gently lifted the old metal box and brushed a thin layer of dust from the silver star inside. He stood, still and composed. Across Fort Lincoln, phones were already ringing. In rooms where lights barely flickered, names were being typed into confidential systems. In a secure office somewhere off post, a general's aide picked up a secure line and spoke calmly. "You're going to want to see this in person, sir." By late afternoon, the entire base was buzzing, though no announcements had been made. No sirens, no official word, yet the mood had shifted. Tension mingled with awe. Something heavy was in the air. Officers who rarely left their desks were suddenly at the windows. Military police radios crackled with cryptic updates. Something was happening. Then, without ceremony or escort, a black SUV bearing government plates slipped quietly through the side gate. No flashing lights, no flags, no fuss, just presence. A quiet force that didn't need permission to command a room or a base. The vehicle rolled to a halt near the command building. The passenger door opened. Out stepped General Richard Hawthorne. He was tall, his broad shoulders refusing to yield to age. His right leg dragged slightly from an old wound, but his posture never wavered. His uniform was immaculate, the row of medals gleaming on his chest like a timeline of battle. His face bore the weight of years in memory, memories that had never been put to rest. No one had expected him. Not the colonel, not the aides, not the sentries. He hadn't called ahead. He hadn't needed to. Without speaking, he passed by a line of saluting officers, eyes scanning the base until they stopped on a solitary figure standing by the eastern gate. A man with a broom in one hand and something fragile in the other. Aaron Mitchell looked up. Time slowed. The general removed his cap slowly, reverently, and held it against his chest. The wind tugged at the corner of the photograph still held in Aaron's hand. As Hawthorne closed the final distance between them, his voice wavered. "You saved my life, Captain," he said, each word soaked with meaning. "I thought you died with the others." Nearby, the soft clatter of dropped tools rang out as a mechanic froze mid-motion. A young recruit lowered his phone, eyes fixed. A group of officers outside the mess hall stopped in their tracks. The entire base held its breath. Two men stood face to face, one in decorated uniform, the other in worn clothing and quiet dignity. Two ends of a story no one knew was still open. Aaron finally spoke, voice steady, eyes calm. "Not all of us made it," he said. "But I couldn't leave, not until I knew someone still remembered." General Hawthorne's jaw tightened. His next words came in a near whisper. "You were listed as KIA. Operation Thunderline was sealed. Your name is etched into the wall at headquarters. I've saluted it more times than I can count. Around them, a small crowd had gathered. They didn't know if this was a confrontation or a long-buried reunion. Someone whispered, "Is that really who I think it is?" Another voice replied in disbelief, "No way! That guy? The janitor?" But no one spoke louder than that, not even the wind. No one dared break the silence. Jason Miller stood just at the edge of the crowd, his heart pounding so loudly in his chest he swore someone near him could hear it. This wasn't just a moment. It felt sacred, weighty, something you didn't breathe too hard in for fear of disturbing it. Across the square, General Hawthorne turned to face the gathering, and when he spoke again, his voice rang out with a calm strength that cut through the hush. "This man is not a janitor," he said, and the words hit like a shockwave. "He is Captain Aaron Mitchell, Special Reconnaissance Unit, presumed killed in action during Operation Thunderline in 1907. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled soldiers and civilians alike, a sound that trembled with disbelief. "He didn't die," Hawthorne continued, his tone unwavering, each word more revealing than the last. "He stayed behind to save us. Every breath I've taken since that day belongs to him." Then, without ceremony or hesitation, Hawthorne took a step back and brought his hand up in a crisp, formal salute. Not the kind given out of obligation, but the kind reserved for living legends. The kind that said, "I see you, I remember." It was as if that gesture unlocked something in the crowd. One by one, soldiers began to straighten their posture. Rank didn't matter, privates, officers, veterans long retired. Like a tide swelling in from the sea, hands slowly rose in silent salute until the entire square stood in unified reverence. Aaron Mitchell didn't speak, but his hand lifted too, trembled just slightly as he returned the gesture. And in that motion, small, almost shy, he was transformed. No longer the man who pushed a broom through corridors without a name. He stood there as what he had always been, a soldier who never left his post. What came next was a story no one at Fort Lincoln could have anticipated. Not from an old man in janitor's clothes, and especially not from a general. They sat together, Captain Mitchell and General Hawthorne, on an old, weather-stained bench near the base gates. The crowd, sensing the gravity of what was unfolding, stayed back but didn't leave. Even the highest-ranking officers stood quietly nearby, as though they too were waiting for some long-buried truth to finally rise to the surface. When Mitchell spoke, his voice carried a stillness that felt both resigned and anchored. "It was April 19M, he began, eyes fixed on the horizon like it held the past he was about to recount. Operation Thunderline wasn't supposed to go the way it did. They'd been deployed into a dense, hostile jungle with nothing but vague intel and hope. No maps, no promises. The mission: extract 6 American POWs from an enemy compound before sunrise. Command said the target was lightly defended. They were wrong." Mitchell recounted it all with the distance of a man reading someone else's memories. "The moment we hit the clearing, gunfire broke out from every direction. We fought our way through, found the prisoners, and got them out. But when we reached the evac point, the chopper was already under fire. He'd ordered everyone aboard, knowing full well he'd be the last one off the field. He'd held the perimeter, laid down cover, every round a barrier between his team and the enemy, until the rotors cut through the air and lifted the bird away, carrying with it a young Lieutenant Richard Hawthorne. I got hit," Mitchell said quietly. "Fell into a ravine. The second chopper exploded overhead. I lost consciousness. When he came to, the jungle was eerily still. No voices, no gunfire, just silence. Then came capture. 2 years in isolation. No name, no recognition, barely enough food to survive. He had destroyed his ID tags during the op, and the physical and psychological trauma left him in a fog that lasted for months. Eventually, through a prisoner exchange, he was brought home. But the military had no idea who he was, no records, no identity. They called me John Doe, he said I had military signs, but no match, and I wasn't in any shape to argue. He was sent to a VA hospital under a name that wasn't his. His memory, scattered like glass across time, came back slowly, pieces at a time, over years. By the time he remembered fully, the world had moved on. His unit disbanded, his file sealed, forgotten, lost in some dusty drawer marked KIA. He had no family left, no one to call, no one to prove he had ever existed. I didn't want to come back and cause a scene, he said. Didn't want applause, didn't want disbelief. I felt like I'd failed. His voice faltered there for the first time. Not everyone made it out. So instead, he quietly returned to the only place that still felt like home, the base. And each morning, without fail, he stood watch. He swept the walkways. He raised his hand to his brow in silent salute as the flag rose overhead. No one noticed. No one looked twice. But he stood at attention every single day. I wasn't looking for a parade, he murmured. I just wanted to make sure the place still stood, that the flag still flew. Beside him, General Hawthorne turned away briefly, as if to shield something behind his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, but it held the firmness of conviction. You didn't fail anyone, Captain. You gave 7 of us lives we never would have known otherwise, families, futures, a second chance. I wouldn't be standing here today if it weren't for you. The truth about Aaron Mitchell's past didn't emerge with fanfare or dramatic announcements. There were no spotlights, no stirring speeches. Instead, it surfaced quietly, gently, from the lips of a man who had spent far too many years in silence. And for the first time in decades, the Army listened. It all moved quickly. Within 48 hours of General Hawthorne's personal visit, the Department of Defense had completed its verification. Cross-checks with ancient mission files, handwriting analysis, and medical documentation left no room for doubt. The conclusion was undeniable. Captain Aaron Mitchell, once presumed dead and etched into the KIA registry, was in fact alive. What followed was a ceremony at Fort Lincoln, the likes of which hadn't been seen in years. Beneath the rising morning sun, rows of chairs stretched out, filled with uniformed soldiers, high-ranking officers, and curious civilians alike. Representatives from the Pentagon made their appearance. Veterans who had once served under Mitchell traveled from different corners of the country just to be there. News cameras lined the edges of the grounds, reporters whispering updates into microphones. Major media outlets across the nation picked up the story. A lost hero returns after 4 decades of silence. But Captain Aaron Mitchell wasn't center stage. He stood quietly along the perimeter of the crowd, in the shadows beneath a grove of trees, far from the podium. He wore no uniform that day, even though one had been custom-fitted for him. Instead, he showed up in the same worn, modest clothes he wore every morning. Nothing fancy, nothing official. His hands were folded calmly behind his back, posture straight, eyes steady, watching as if all of this were about someone else. One by any, the medals were restored to him. The Silver Star, for gallantry under fire. The Purple Heart, for wounds endured in the line of duty. The Distinguished Service Cross, for leading a mission so dangerous no one thought it possible and no one else had dared to attempt. His name was removed from the list of the fallen and officially reclassified as retired with honor. Back pay for decades of lost service was reinstated, with interest. He was offered housing on any military base of his choice, lifetime medical care, and full access to every veteran benefit that had been denied to him for 40 years. When his name was finally called to speak, Aaron Mitchell made his way to the podium at a slow, measured pace. The crowd stood out of respect, but he lifted a hand to quiet them. No applause, please. I appreciate what's been done here today, he began, voice soft yet grounded with unwavering strength. But I didn't come back for medals. I didn't stay to be found. He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle. I just wanted to watch over the flag to make sure it never went unraised. Silence settled across the crowd, thick and reverent. I don't need a house, he said quietly. I don't want a title. I've lived behind enough walls for one lifetime. Then he turned his gaze toward the base commander. All I'd like is permission to raise the flag each morning, just that, nothing more. The stillness in the air was broken when General Hawthorne rose slowly from his seat in the front row. He faced the base commander, then the audience. Captain Mitchell has earned the right to raise any flag on any base in this country, the general said, voice steady with a conviction. If he wants to serve, we should be honored to let him. Applause broke out at once, thunderous and sincere. But Mitchell didn't linger. He simply offered a quiet nod and stepped down from the stage. In the days that followed, the base was overwhelmed by requests from media outlets. Everyone wanted a piece of the story, interviews, TV specials, documentaries. But Mitchell turned them all away. He wasn't interested in fame or retellings. If I'd wanted attention, he said plainly, I wouldn't have spent 40 years in silence. Instead, he returned to his routine. Only now that routine was subtly different. At exactly 0600 hours, the base gates opened just a little earlier than usual. Not for a general's convoy, not for an official inspection, but for one man. A man in a weathered jacket, walking steadily toward the flagpole. One arm cradled a carefully folded American flag, the other held a broom. And every morning the honor guard now stood with him. A bugler from the base band played. There were no commands shouted, no roll calls, just the quiet, reverent ritual of a man doing what he felt called to do. Over time, the base began to understand. Some men don't serve for medals or recognition. They serve out of something deeper, something quieter. Duty that doesn't end with age or accolades. One morning, a small boy wandered over to the flagpole, still in his pajamas. He clutched a toy truck in one hand, his father's hand in the other. He stood there, silent, watching as Aaron Mitchell raised the flag with slow, deliberate reverence, each fold perfectly aligned, each movement honoring something far greater than himself. He never asked why, just stood there with wide, awestruck eyes, as though he were witnessing something sacred, something far beyond his understanding. Not a word passed his lips, but the weight in his gaze said everything. It was reverence, raw and honest, as if what he saw in that morning ritual held more meaning than any lesson, sermon, or ceremony he had ever known. The very next day, 3 children showed up. By the time the month drew to a close, that number had grown to a dozen. They gathered at dawn, bundled in school uniforms, wrapped in blankets, or shielded from the rain by slick, oversized coats. They called him Mr. Mitchell or simply Captain, depending on what they'd overheard at home. Aaron always responded the same way, with a slight nod, a gentle smile, and then he would turn back to his quiet, steady task. He never gave speeches. He never stood on a platform or demanded attention. And yet, over time, the children began to speak. They began to wonder out loud, curiosity overcoming the hush of early morning. Why do you stand so still, sir? Were you really in a war? Do you miss your team? And in his calm, deliberate way, Aaron answered, not everything, but only what truly mattered. Discipline matters most when no one's watching. Duty isn't what you're told to do, it's what you choose to do. And the one that stayed with them, yes, I miss them every single day. News traveled far beyond the gates of Fort Lincoln. Cadets from Silver Ridge Military Academy, an hour away, began making weekend trips just to witness him. Some came with notebooks, standing back in silence, taking in every motion. The precise way he folded the flag, the way he saluted in solitude, the way he stooped to pick up the smallest piece of litter near the pole. They never interrupted, rarely spoke. They simply watched. And from that quiet study, something profound began to take root. Soon after, the Academy joined forces with the Department of Defense to establish the Aaron Mitchell Ethics Library. It wasn't just a collection of books on military leadership. It became a living archive of journals, handwritten letters, and case studies exploring the emotional and ethical fabric of service. Visiting the library became a required experience for every graduating officer candidate, not just for knowledge, but for grounding, for humility, for human connection. But Aaron's impact didn't stop at bookshelves. Just before his retirement, General Richard Hawthorne led a sweeping initiative to ensure what happened to Aaron would never happen again. The Mitchell Protocol was born, comprehensive reform designed to prevent oversight and abandonment. The protocol enforced follow-up procedures for soldiers presumed KIA, especially those involved in classified operations. It called for secondary identification methods during covert missions, mandatory reviews of veterans with unidentified status, and placed firm responsibility on commanding officers to confirm the reintegration of POWs and returning MIAs. It was a quiet affair, signed into policy in a small Pentagon conference room. At the head of the table stood the flag. Beside it, a framed photograph of Aaron Mitchell. He wasn't present for the signing. He never sought recognition. When someone told him of the changes made in his name, he simply nodded and said, "If it helps someone else find their way back home, then that's enough." Fort Lincoln itself transformed because of him. The simple act of raising the flag each morning evolved into something sacred. Duty rosters were adjusted so more soldiers could attend. School buses began arriving 5 minutes early so children could be there, standing quietly as the anthem played. Officers invoked Aaron's name during leadership training, not to glorify heroism, but to anchor the conversation in sacrifice no one sees. The kind that never asked for attention. Aaron never stood behind a microphone. He never accepted honorary degrees or wrote a memoir. Yet his presence, steady, humble, unwavering, became the soul of the base. He was its conscience, its memory, a daily reminder that true valor isn't always found in parades or printed pages. Sometimes it walks among us, broom in hand, heart wrapped in stars and stripes. Every morning as the national anthem echoed and the flag slowly rose into the golden sky, the people gathered didn't just see a ceremony. They witnessed a legacy in motion. Years passed and still Aaron Mitchell lived as he always had, quietly without fanfare. He turned down the housing offered to him on base, choosing instead a modest studio apartment in a sleepy neighborhood just 2 miles away. There were no decorations on the walls, no trophies, no framed honors, just a simple bookshelf, a weathered recliner, and in the corner, a wooden case holding his broom and his carefully folded uniform. Each morning before most of the base stirred awake, he set out on the familiar path. Same time, same rhythm, same purpose. He raised the flag at Fort Lincoln every single day. Whether it rained, snowed, or scorched the earth with summer heat, he never missed. Not once. Even when his joints stiffened with age, even when his breath came with effort, he showed up. And the children still came. The soldiers still saluted. The chaplain, in moments of quiet reflection, often said Aaron's steady presence lifted morale more deeply than any sermon or motivational speech ever could. On his 80th birthday, the base didn't throw a grand celebration or invite media attention. Instead, they gathered quietly beneath the flagpole, just the people who truly mattered. There were no flashing cameras, no speeches crafted for headlines, only genuine hearts honoring a man who had never asked to be remembered. The gifts were modest, yet deeply meaningful. One was a hand-carved walking staff, painstakingly shaped by a wounded Marine from the rehab unit on base. Another was a bundle of handwritten letters, dozens of them, from children of military families. Their pages were filled with bright crayon drawings, innocent questions, and heartfelt thanks. Sergeant Jason Miller, who had once been a young private first class under Aaron Mitchell's quiet guidance, stood and read aloud a note. It was signed by the entire morning watch. To the man who reminds us what service really means. We stand because you stood first. General Richard Hawthorne, now retired, had also come that day. After the small ceremony, when the crowd had thinned and the flag stood still against the breeze, he and Aaron sat together in silence. Eventually, Aaron looked at him, his expression somewhere between disbelief and humility, and said softly, "I never thought anyone would remember me." The general didn't hesitate. He smiled, gentle, knowing, and replied, "That was always your blind spot, Captain. You never understood how unforgettable you were." 5 years later, Aaron passed away in his sleep. No farewell speeches, no written final words. Just a tired old soldier, one hand resting on the staff by his bed, slipping peacefully into the next world. When news of his passing spread, the military funeral held in his honor brought out hundreds. Soldiers, veterans, cadets, families, and even strangers who had only heard Aaron Mitchell's story once but had never been able to forget it. But the most moving tribute came not during the funeral, but the very next morning. At exactly 0600 hours, across 7 military bases from coast to coast, 7 American flags were raised in perfect unison, each flag lifted by a young soldier, some who had known Aaron Mitchell personally, others who had grown up hearing about him around dinner tables and in quiet bedtime stories. Each of those folded flags was later brought to a local school, delivered with a handwritten note that read, "Heroism isn't about medals. It's about the choices no one sees." Signed simply, a friend of Captain Aaron Mitchell. Long after his death, Aaron still taught. not through rank or glory or authority, but through the enduring legacy of how he had lived, quietly, consistently, with deep and honest care. He never asked for recognition. He never sought applause, medals, or even a salute, but his silent service, his steady presence, and the quiet dignity with which he lived reminded everyone around him that duty doesn't vanish with retirement, and honor doesn't dim with age. His broom, yes, just an old broom to some, was never just for sweeping. It was a banner, a belief, a daily act of faith that every hallway, every child, every flag deserved care, even when no one else was watching. So when you pass by the janitor in your school, or the bus driver who never misses a stop in pouring rain, or the old man alone on a park bench carefully folding a flag no one asked him to raise, pause. He may have once stood in front of gunfire, so you didn't have to. Aaron Mitchell never wanted the spotlight, but by showing up again and again, with integrity as his compass and kindness as his creed, he became the quiet standard by which others measured what it means to serve. If you've ever met someone like Aaron Mitchell, say thank you. It might be the only thanks they ever get, because not all heroes wear uniforms anymore. Some carry brooms, some walk with a limp, some simply show up and do the right thing when no one else is looking. And if this story reminded you of someone whose quiet strength shaped your life, share it. Tell us. Because these aren't just stories, they're legacies. And when we remember them together, we make sure no good person is ever forgotten again.